Welcome to another edition of Trail Runner Nation. My name is Don Freeman.
I'm Adam Kimble.
And I'm Scott Warr. We're going to start today's episode with a story. It's a Zen story about a king whose subjects had become soft. He placed a boulder in the middle of the road that completely blocked off the city and stood by to see how his people would react to this big boulder, this obstacle. Some saw the boulder and turned around immediately and laughed. Some tried, they got discouraged, and they gave up. Others complained and placed blame on others for the boulder. Then one day, a peasant came to the boulder. He tried, and then he got an idea. He turned and went into the forest and came back with a lever that he had created. And he used that lever to move the boulder out of the way. And when he got the boulder out of the way, he found on the ground under the boulder a purse of gold and a note from the king that said, "The obstacle in the path becomes the path. The obstacle is an opportunity for us to improve our condition." In this episode, and we'll probably do two others, it's a 3-part series that will scatter throughout the next few months. We're going to walk through a book on the ancient philosophy of Stoicism, interpreted by the expert author Ryan Holiday. He wrote a book called The Obstacle is the Way: The Ancient Art of Turning Adversity to Advantage. In his book, he teaches us 3 steps to overcoming obstacle. It begins on how we look at our specific problems, our attitudes, or our approach. Then the energy and creativity with which we actively break them down and turn them into opportunities. And finally, the cultivation and maintenance of an inner will that allows us to handle defeat and difficulty. These 3 episodes in the series will be centered around these 3 interdependent and interconnected disciplines of perception, action, and will. Today's is the first episode, and we're going to concentrate on perception.
So is it King's story? Is that a true story or?
No, it's a Zen fable. It's a fable. Adam, when we got you this book, what were your initial thoughts as you started reading through it?
Yeah, I loved it. I mentioned before that I've been a fan of Ryan Holiday's for a while. He does a lot of, if you're not familiar with him, he does a lot of studying of the Stoics and Stoicism and extracting like important lessons from those people and kind of the experiences that they had. And so this is kind of in alignment with that. And I just loved it. I felt like as I was reading it, it was like walking down memory lane, just recalling conversations that I had had with friends, with athletes that I coach, and just different people along the way, talking about these very concepts and how this can very much apply to our lives in general and does apply to our lives in general, but also more specifically can apply to our running lives and ultra running and trail running as well.
Don, what about you? What did you think as you started reading this book?
Well, I had read this book a couple years back, and just because of the title, "The Obstacle is the Way," and we all have times in our lives that maybe we identify an obstacle, and bang, that came up on my list. Wait, maybe this is a sign. Maybe I should read it. Maybe there's something in here for me. And I found that when I read it at that point, it meant a lot to me. But coming back and reading it again, rereading it, made me realize that sometimes we need to reread something because we're a different person now than we were before. The message that came to me on the second time through was different than the message that I needed the first time. So rereading a book is not just because your memory's failing, but because maybe you've changed a little bit inside and there's a new lesson waiting for you.
So this first episode is about perception, and we encourage you to go get the book and read the book. In fact, you can do some homework. We're not going to do these episodes back to back to back. We'll maybe do one a month or something like that until we finish it out. And if you want to, you can pause this episode and go get the book and read the section on perception, and then come back and try to participate with the conversation. Or you can listen to it and be motivated to go buy the book, however you want to do it. Don, let's start with you. What did you get out of the section on perception? What golden nuggets did you come up with?
Well, as I looked at the 3 sections and I thought about the titles that Ryan gave it, and not our producer Ryan, but Ryan Holiday, of perception, you've got to look and see where you're at and take inventory of the situation. Then you need to come up with, I thought it was wise how he came up with these 3 titles. Then you have to put a plan into action. Based on where I am right now, what am I going to do to move through it? And then inevitably, when you have a plan and you're in the middle of it, something might go sideways. Then you have to have the will to adapt and change so you can get to the finish line, whatever it might be. And I realized that, all of these things, whether it's on the trail or in life, it is just a sequence of problem, solution, and problem, solution, then the finish line. And the finish line might mean a t-shirt or a belt buckle. And in some cases, it might be a final finish line when we take our new resting spot. So, life is just a series of challenges and solutions.
Yeah. Adam, any thoughts as we start this section on perception?
Yeah, just so many good things here. I made some notes about some of my favorite sort of quotes and just observations that we'll get into more here shortly. But one of those things is just that I guess an idea that Ryan sort of dives into is the idea that, time and time again, it's the way in which we see the obstacles, it's not the way in which we see the obstacles. It's how we react to them and whether we keep our composure that really matters. And so I talk a lot about, one of my favorite things to talk about is just framing situations. And I think he kind of actually very early in the book, he gets into this where he says the object of this book isn't to see everything through rose-colored glasses. In fact, it's very much not that. Instead, it's taking what you are going through and the obstacle that you're presented with, and rather than having perhaps an emotional reaction to it, which is very common for us to do, instead looking at it in a very pragmatic way and saying, how am I going to work through this? And then kind of going at it from there.
Yeah, and I think about this. Part of perception is to stay calm and observant and try to pull yourself away from situation and look at it in an objective way. And he has some stories of how John D. Rockefeller did this and how, because he was able to stay calm in situations, he was able to build this massive empire. But as I think about trail running, you guys have probably seen this, whether you were crewing or pacing or even volunteering at a race. I remember a race, I think it was Rio del Lago, probably over 10 years ago. And we were at one of the later aid stations. I think they had 20 miles left to go in this 100-mile race, or 25 miles left. And we were seeing people come in. It was nighttime. It was a really hot day and just carnage everywhere. And you could see the difference in attitude of these runners. Someone would come in and they would just be completely emotionally destroyed and, so concerned and anxious about things. And I remember this one guy coming in, the jester. What's the guy's name?
Oh, Ed Eddinghausen. I know.
Ed Eddinghausen. He came in and he looked hammered. And I was really impressed by the way that he perceived where he was and stayed calm. I went over to him and I said, let me get you a chair. And he goes, yeah, that'd be great. And he sat down in the chair. I said, can I get you anything? He said, yeah, I'd like some water. And, if you have some watermelon or something like that, just so calm. And I brought it back to him and he said, hey, I'm going to fall asleep here for about 10 minutes. And he said, I should wake up on my own, but can you come over and make sure that I wake up in 10 minutes? And sure enough, he just was cool over there. Everybody else is chaotic and anxious. And he's over there in his chair eating his watermelon. And then he slowly falls asleep. And sure enough, like there was an alarm clock, 10 minutes, he woke up, he stood up, and he said, hey, thanks for your guys' help. And he walked out of the aid station. And I thought, how is this guy so calm in that he was hurting, that he was in a bad spot, but he stayed calm and was in charge of what he could control, right? And I just loved that. It was a lesson I'll never forget.
So good. I don't know what the tally on that is currently, but I know Ed is in the mix for most 100-mile finishes, period, like of anybody. I don't know what the number's at, but it's an insane number. So that to me also speaks to the power of experience and what having been through that can do for you as well. I want to add one more thing to that. This is a perfect segue into my favorite quote for sure from this first section of the book. And it's a quote from William Shakespeare. And he said, nothing is either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. And I just really
Love it.
Yeah, I absolutely loved it too, Scott. And it really made me think about that idea in general, about how we just naturally assign, feelings to pretty much anything that happens. And some of those things, when you look at them sort of objectively, it seems like they should be good or bad. But when you really dig into it, it's actually just us assigning that, right? It's like the example I kept coming back to. It's like, well, if you find out somebody in your family has a serious illness, that's obviously a bad thing, right? And yeah, it's not, you wouldn't celebrate that. But I think the point is it's this thing that has a lot of challenges that come with it. Now, we can call it terrible, we can call it the worst, whatever, but that's not productive. It's saying, okay, this is the situation now. What are the next steps to help us try to beat this, to move us through, and to go from there? And that's really I think the essence of that quote and why I love it so much.
Yeah, that's a good one. Now, Scott, you asked us to come prepared with a perception story. Are you still
go for it?
Have that on the list? Are you
absolutely share your perception?
Are you ready to go with yours first? Because I want to measure mine up. Depending on which one I'm going to tell, will be based on your story.
Well, I just told you the story of Ed Hedethausen.
Okay, so yeah, here's my story. It gives me a chance to tell people that I did this, because I swore to myself I would never use an ice bath ever. And we've done podcasts on it, and we've talked to Alex Hutchinson and various authorities on is it good for you, inflammation, all the things that is life-changing. And I've been parts of discussion where people are talking about it. But for me, that's the last thing.
Let me chirp in here and tell the audience how much Don hates to be cold.
Yeah.
Anytime we'll show up to the trailhead on a Saturday morning and it's 80 degrees outside and he's wearing a jacket. And I go, hey, I don't think you're going to need it. And he goes, it's kind of chilly out here, isn't it? And I go, no, it's not. So just to give you a matter of perception of where Don is coming from.
It's 100-degree day, and the pool that I'm going to enter is 81 degrees, and I dip my toe and I go, nope, not for me today. So I'm not a big fan. And this particular ice bath was 41 degrees, and I'm not exaggerating. They put big blocks of ice in it and dry ice in it. And it was a challenge, really, to say, can you do it? And there was a number of us, and everybody said yes. And I was holding back because my answer was clearly no. I'd made that decision several years ago. But I had a little peer pressure. It's probably how I ended up with running a trail run along at some point. And I said, okay, I'm in. If you're doing it, I'm doing it. And so I get in, and that experience was really perception. It was about, okay, this isn't going to kill me. I have to trust that it's going to be okay. And I can't panic because I know the outcome is going to be all right. People use them. They come out. It's only 5 minutes long, which for me was an eternity. I just need to stay calm. And they only started the clock once the group of 4 of us all were into our neck. One person was mid-chest. Clock isn't starting. You can bet there was a lot of pressure to get that person down to get this thing started. One person sat on a piece of dry ice and came out with a permanent injury on their skin. So I'm not going to call out any names, but it wasn't me. And so I'm sitting there and just realizing you have to trust. You have to say, this is going to be fine. Get in there and just let it happen and not fight it. Because if you fight it, anxiety happens. And if you fight it, then you start to use all your defenses to try to shiver, get up, this is going to kill me. All the dialogue goes in your head. But to just take it in, observe it, be calm with it, accept it, and then get out when the time came. The perception of making sure that, you know what, this is a ritual. It is okay. Get it done, accomplish it, and get through it. That was the perception, was everything. If it was just me by myself, nobody else there watching. I wasn't holding hand with the person next to me because I did that. We all held hands. It was a real unity thing. And so I couldn't get out because both my hands were held. And then the clock would stop. So I had to stay there. But I just sunk into that and I settled into it. And I'm proud of that moment enough to talk about it on a podcast. And it was really just about perception of it. This is okay. I'm going to get it done. Let it happen, and then get out. And so that was my perception of an ice bath is going to kill me, and I actually survived it and get to brag about it a little bit.
I will tell you that Don sent me a photo of him in that ice bath. And when I first saw it, I thought, because they were all smiling like they were having a good time, and I thought he's in a jacuzzi, and I didn't see the ice floating. And I go, Nice, Don. You're in a jacuzzi. Big whoop. And he goes, that's an ice bath, War. He said, it's 41 degrees in here. And so I was very impressed by Don. Now, the thing that I want to bring up that relates to that is I think Stoicism, and Ryan Holiday brings this up in the book, is he says, a situation is neither good nor bad. It's only situation. And if you change your paradigm to say this ice bath is neither good nor bad, it's an experience, and I'm going to go in and I have the only thing I have control over how I'm going to react to the situation. You're not going to jump in an ice bath and have enough body heat to warm the entire water pool up. You're not going to be able to do that. You have no control over the temperature, but you do have control over how you're going to react. And I think that that's something that I've learned through trail running, but resonates as Ryan Holiday describes it in the book.
I remember. Go ahead, Adam.
I was just going to say, to piggyback off of that thought, Scott, and I don't think he used this exact example in the book, but I know at some point he referenced Viktor Frankl, and Man's Search for Meaning is another great book. But Viktor Frankl was a Holocaust survivor, and I remember him speaking about being in the concentration camps, and one of the things that he says was, no matter what they took away from me, it could take away my food, they could take away my clothes, my freedom, all these things, but they could never take away his mind and how he thought and how he perceived things. And I just think it's such a powerful, especially coming from somebody like him. That's like the ultimate speaking the truth, you know. But that goes to your point about it's neither good nor bad. It's all the way in which we perceive it, how we control it, and the way that we act based off of it.
Don, I want you to tell your Marine story.
Trail and you tell it, Scott.
No, it's your story because it directly relates to that Viktor Frankl example.
So I'm 18 years old. I'm going into boot camp. I have no idea what it's going to be like. I know it's going to be the hardest thing that I've ever done in my 18 years. And I'm just prepared for anything. And I imagine myself, they could do X, Y, Z to me, and that's going to be terrible. I might have to put a rope between my teeth and pull something out through the bay. I mean, I have no idea what's going to happen to me, but I said, no matter what they do, I'm going to have the freedom to move my tongue to the left side of my mouth or the right side of my mouth, or anything I want to do with it as I'm standing there at whatever attention they have me at. I have all that freedom that I want. That's all I expected. And if I had at least that, I was okay. They couldn't take that from me because they couldn't see it, and it was what I had control over.
I love that. I'm glad you made him tell that story, Scott. That was awesome.
I've heard it like 3 or 4 times, and I love it. Because I've never been through something like that. I think I live vicariously through Don in many cases.
And Brian Kontosh has been on and talked about it on this podcast about the fact that if you have a problem, let it be a problem and let it vocalize and recognize it and honor it for a certain period of time. Give it its 15 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever it needs of glory, and then it's done. That's all you get. And then it's time to fix things and go back to work.
One of the things that I also like about this, and it's, again, perceptions, how you come across a situation that is a hurdle. How are you going to attack this? And I think that one of the paradigm changes you can make in your mind is that any of these mistakes or situations becomes training. And that's what we're used to, right? As runners, we're used to going out there and training. And we're going to be doing some speed work, or we're going to do hill repeats, and it's all training. So just think of these obstacles as training. If you're out there for a long run and you're in a bonk, you're on a training run and you hit a bonk, you can easily sit down and have a pity party and, blame yourself or complain. But look at it as, you know what? Now I get to experience a bonk so that when this happens in a race or it happens next time, I'm going to be better because of it. Or maybe I'll put some fuel in my stomach so it doesn't happen again. It's a training event.
Yeah, 100%. That's I actually made a note about that exact idea there, Scott, where he talks about how a lot of our, I guess, reactions to things can be based in uncertainty and fear. And a way to train out of that, a way to work your way through that is through authority. And one version of authority is training. experience, things that put you through these situations. And I just love, he says that even innate fears are bred mostly from unfamiliarity. So if we can remove that piece of the puzzle through the training, through the experience, then we can move through those situations and get through those obstacles in a much more successful way.
As I was reading through, one of the things, I don't know if it was a direct quote from him or an example, or maybe I read it, thought it was mine. I mean, that could have been it. But I thought about, if I was to write a story, I had a chance to write a story that could go any way that I wanted. And how would I write my story? Well, I'd want to have some adversity. I'd want to have some challenges. I'd want to be the hero of my own story and overcome those challenges with some decision that I made. For the story that I would write about trail running or life in general, I'd want to have some adversity. So why do I push back so hard when they come at me? When I get something that is obviously an obstacle, inconvenient for me at the time, if I never had them, I would never write my own story of being a hero. I would just be the luckiest guy in the world. And that is a pretty simple and a short book if you're the luckiest guy in the world. But so I think the obstacle is the way. And I think that what he has summarized here is what life's about. And I think that's why it's interesting for us to talk.
Along that same lines, Don, and you've heard this statement differently in our ultra community. I'm going to say it the way that Ryan says it in the book, and then we can say how we translate that and how we tell ourselves the same concept on the trail. But he says, this moment is not your life. It is a moment in your life. Right? And we talk about this in a different way. We've heard there's probably a few different ways that we talk about it. But I think specifically we say, don't worry about how bad it is right now. It's going to get better, right? That, it ebbs and flows. Regardless of how deep you are in despair, it's going to get better. It can't last. It cannot last on a trail run, right? It's going to turn around.
The only way it lasts is if you end up letting it take you out. And then that's the end of the story. That's where the book stops. It's like, yeah, it took me out. And now it's even too late to change it. Now, I'll qualify it. Sometimes there's times you need to pull out. And the bigger story is I pulled out that last race. In this race, I overcome because I learned that lesson. So great story. But in some cases, if you don't get a chance to go back, then that's final.
We talk about this like we're experts at it, and this takes practice, right? I'm not perfect at it. I'm sure, Adam, you're not perfect at it. Don, you're probably close, but not there. It takes practice.
I'm not going to argue with that.
As you first start into trail and ultra running, or dealing with adversity, we're kind of like the deer, right? A deer hears a stimulus or sees something that it feels threatened by, and it has an immediate reaction to leave, to escape, to flee. And it could actually flee onto the big highway with a bunch of cars and it gets hit. Our initial reactions are there, I think, innately to help us survive and to protect ourselves. And it takes practice for us to continue to reframe, to your point, Adam, to frame things, to catch ourselves when we see an obstacle and say, okay, wait a minute, stop, be calm, like John D. Rockefeller, be calm. Don't react on our initial emotions because they can almost be involuntary, but be conscious and practice the ability to say, oh, this obstacle is neither good nor bad. I get to choose how I react to it. Now let's act. And let's have the will, and we'll get into the act and the actions and the will in the next few episodes.
Yeah, I think go ahead, Adam. I know what I'm going to say. It's not going to be as good as yours. Go.
I was just going to say, I love the idea that, and he talks about this in this section, and I can't remember. I think he uses a specific example, and right now I'm failing to remember what that example is. But he talks about in situations where stuff catches us off guard, or we're sort of caught in a precarious situation. It's never talent that wins out in those situations. It's always grace and poise. And that made me think about that. I'm like, yeah, that's really interesting. It doesn't matter how good someone is at something. If they get flustered in the highest intensity situations, then that talent goes out the window, right? So it's really about how you handle those situations and how you move forward. And it made me think, we've maybe talked about this. We've done so many episodes together, guys. I don't remember all the things I've said to you, but you both know that I have or all three of you know that I have a baseball background. I played baseball at a Division I school in college. So I played with some incredible athletes, several of whom went on to play baseball professionally. And if you asked me what was the most common attribute that you saw and it wasn't in all of them, but in most of the guys I played with or against that made it to the big leagues, what was the thing that I noticed in them that maybe set them apart? It was the grace and poise. So for example, I played with some guys that they might be 4 for 4 with 4 home runs or 0 for 4 with 4 strikeouts. And if you were in the dugout with them, you would have no idea which one it was. And then there's other guys that they're 0 for 4 with 4 strikeouts and they're throwing their helmet and, making errors in the field. It's a common thing to get frustrated. And I wasn't immune to that. I was, that happened to me as well. And it's much more easy to get flustered in those situations and let that bleed into everything else that you're doing in the game than it is to say, all right, this happened. It's over. There's nothing I can do about it now, good or bad. Now let's focus on the game ahead of me.
And there is a section in the book called Live in the Present. So you forget about the past. And we've all watched Ted Lasso, or at least all of us except for Don has watched Ted Lasso, and where he talks to the soccer player that says, what animal has the shortest memory? The goldfish.
Be a goldfish.
And be a goldfish. But he lists, and I have a list with me right here, of great companies that started during tough economic times. So they're in a situation that you would think, boy, right now we're in a recession, we're in a depression. This is not the time to start a big company. But let me list a few of them. FedEx started during the oil crisis of 1973. Walt Disney Company, after 11 months of smooth operation, the 12th was the market crash of 1929. So they tried 11 times and failed. The 12th time was after the market crash of 1929. Standard Oil, which is John D. Rockefeller, who you mentioned, bought out his partners in what became the Standard Oil and took over in February of 1865, the final year of the Civil War. Costco, we all know Costco, what giant behemoth that is globally. They started during the Depression of the 1970s. And the list goes on. There's probably 20 companies that he lists that started when you would think this is not the time to start a company. So being in the present, to your point, Adam, is so important. Forget about the past. Look to the future. If you have a good idea or if you have a good why when you're on the trail, focus on the why, focus on the present. And Don says this all the time when you're running. What can I do now? One step in front of that, or what can I do? Let's get to the next aid station. Let's focus on the now, not 75 miles from now.
Boy, Adam, I really liked your story. I'm glad I didn't talk over you because I wouldn't have learned about the baseball player that, 4 for 4 with, 4 home runs and the other one with 4 strikeouts. You have to be able to shut down everything that's happened behind you if you're going to perform in front of you. It's such a mind game. We talk about running being a mind game. Golf is a mind game. Business is a mind game. It's all about your attitude, your self-doubt, your self-perception. Who am I? And if you're up at that plate, I've got a stadium full of people. This is really important because we're at 2 strikes out, two strikes, 2 outs in the 9th inning. I'm the wrong guy. You are the wrong guy. You want to be the guy that says, I can hit this guy. I've hit him before, and I don't even know how many strikes. I know how many strikes is going to predict the kind of pitch that comes. I've got that, but I'm going to knock this ball out of the park. And that's just the way it's going to be. That's the guy you want at the plate.
Yeah.
That story reminds me recently of the Olympics, the volleyball teams. I was watching some beach volleyball, and the U.S. team, I can't remember if it was women's or the men's now, but they were getting their butts handed to them, and they were down considerably. And yet the announcer was saying the great athletes or the great competitors don't look at the score. and look at the past and say, I'm down 2-0, 14-1. They don't think about that when the serve goes over the net. They're thinking about that point and how can they win that point. And it's just fascinating.
Yeah, that brings up another example. I remember this was a handful of years ago. I've always loved watching tennis. Played it some, but really, really love watching it and argue. Well, not it's really not arguable if you're going based off of victories, but the most successful men's tennis player of all time now is Novak Djokovic. He's won more majors than any other player. And I think it was 3 or 4 years ago, he was playing in the Wimbledon final. And he was down, if you're not familiar with tennis, he was down like 3 or 4 match points, meaning that he had to win 3 or 4 straight points. And if he lost any of them, his opponent won the match. And in one of those points, it was they had a volley that seemed to go on forever, just back and forth, and he was hitting amazing shot after amazing shot, and then he eventually won the point, and he went on to win the major. And then afterwards, they were interviewing him, and they said something like, "What were you thinking during that whole back and forth volley, knowing that if you were off at all, game over?" And actually, his answer goes back to what we were just talking about a few moments ago. He said he kind of trained it out of himself. He said, "This is what I prepare for in training. When I'm getting ready for my matches, I'm doing this all the time. So I wasn't thinking I'm going to miss this shot. I was thinking I'm doing what I always do when I'm training." And he trained himself to do it. He did it. And he wasn't getting in his head. He just did what he knew he had to do.
Speaking of training, Ryan brings up the astronauts, the Gemini and Apollo astronauts. And he said that the one skill that they trained more than any of their skills was the art of not panicking. And I think it was Neil Armstrong, he was up in space for quite a while, and they said his heart rate never got up over 100. And that includes the launch. When you have a rocket strapped to your back and you're going Mach whatever into the atmosphere that no one has been up there, and he still keeps his heart rate at under 100. And the reason for that is, yes, he's probably very gifted. Yes, he's very fit and healthy, but he trained for that. It took practice.
I'm so glad you used that example, Scott, because you just bailed me out when I was talking about when I was talking about talent versus grace and poise. I'm almost certain he was talking about the astronauts.
Okay.
Yeah. He was like, they specifically look for the people that are good under pressure and can handle those situations versus somebody that might have more skill.
When we call back to it a number of times because it's such a great line when Ann Trayson says the very best trail runners are the best decision makers. And so you think in context to be a good decision maker, to be creative, you can't panic, you can't have anxiety. To get to that point that Ann was talking about, you have to be able to observe the situation, understand the variables, be able to play the scenarios out of what do I need to do? Do I know what to do? Has it happened to me before? And then execute. So we need to be able to pull ourselves out of panic mode and go into problem solving mode, and then apply the tools that we've gathered, or for people that can contribute that we might be running next to, because maybe they've seen it and done it. Scott.
One of the notes that I took out of the book relates specifically to that, Don. They say, does worry provide you more options?
No.
If you're worried about something, does it provide you with more options? It doesn't. Staying calm, collected, and looking at the situation, that's when you have multiple options open in front of you. So worry doesn't help.
It only helps if you're in a worry contest. Then you would rule.
I'm number one. I'm number one.
That's a great one. When is the only time that worry is helpful? When you're in a worrying contest.
Speaking of baseball, and we were on a group text before this, and we brought it up, and I was reminded how big of a baseball fan Adam was. But they bring up the story of Tommy John. Now, I don't know who he is. Tell us a little bit, Adam. What do you know about Tommy John?
Well, I can tell you this. It's over time, it's kind of morphed into other different things. But back kind of when I was growing up in the baseball age, and sort of, I guess, when I was in like high school and college, more people knew Tommy John's name, not because of his career, but because of the injury that he had. because whenever a pitcher would get hurt and have a serious arm injury, a lot of times they had to have what was called Tommy John surgery. So if you were in the baseball world, people would know what that was. And I'm guessing probably a lot of people that weren't big baseball fans didn't even know it was named after a player, right? It's just a thing, right? It's just a thing. So yeah, but he was a professional pitcher who, and maybe you want to dig more into this, Scott, but he kind of came to a similar situation where he had this injury that prior to him experiencing the injury, any other pitcher that had gone through a similar thing, I think it was the ulnar collateral ligament is the one that he damaged. Every other pitcher that had come before him, it was their death sentence as far as their career was concerned. And for him, he didn't see it that way, and he thought, if you're saying there's a chance, then maybe there's a chance. And so he actually kind of rewrote the book on that and was able to continue his career after having that surgery. And perhaps the most impressive thing, which is what we were talking about earlier, was that he pitched to both Mickey Mantle and Mark McGwire. Is that right, Scott?
Yeah.
So his career spanned, I forget what it was, 27.
20-something years. I mean, it's nuts how long he was in there as a pitcher.
As a pitcher, which is the hardest way to do that, right? So yeah, just incredible. I might have said more than you wanted me to say there, but sorry if I took
No, that was perfect coming from a baseball guy. The one thing that I remember during the story in the story is he was later in his career, and at the end of the season, the New York Yankees let him go, and he didn't accept that. He's here's an obstacle. There's an opportunity here. And so he went to the coaches and he said, if I come back at spring training as a free agent, will you give me a fair look? And they go, dude, we just let you go. You're done. You're washed up. People that your age should not be playing professional baseball. You're done. And he said, will you give me a fair look if I come back at spring training? And so he went out, saw this obstacle as an opportunity, and he worked his butt off during the off season, came back at spring training, and got a contract to play ball that next season, even after he was let go. And I just think, I mean, you're that old, you've had the shoulder surgery. I mean, you got to say, okay, I see the writing on the wall, but he didn't see that. He didn't see this big boulder that he couldn't move out of the path. He said, this boulder is the path. I love baseball, and I'm going to do whatever I can to get through the boulder, around the boulder, above, beyond, whatever the boulder.
And he pitched a number of years after that. It wasn't just like they kept him there for a guy to clean up the towels in the dugout. You know, he pitched a number of successful seasons after that. And I want to make this comment about a person with vision like that and the courage and the hard work to do it. Many of us now have heard of the Tommy John surgery, not because it was Dr. Tommy John, but that athlete was successful for doing it, giving us all confidence that maybe it'll work for me. It worked for him. All the runs that we do, your first, 5 mile or 50 mile or whatever the number is, we look to others that have done it. Before I got in that ice bath, I looked and said, people have done this. It's not going to kill me. People that have done things prior to us give us the confidence that we can do it too. And I think that that really is a good statement for our community. A lot of people have done it and shown us the way.
Yeah, absolutely. And to your point there, Don, like I said, the Tommy John surgery, that became a common thing then where pitchers would have that surgery and then play afterwards, right? But prior to him, it's kind of like Roger Bannister with the 4-minute mile, right? It's impossible. Oh, now one person's done it. Now 100 other people are going to do it,
Right.
There's got to be that first pioneer.
Before it was called the Tommy John surgery, it was career-ending surgery.
Yeah.
When it became the Tommy John surgery, it's probably the same surgery, but the pitchers thought, oh, this is a different one. I can come back from this, right?
They called it the same thing, but no, it's a Tommy John surgery.
The doctor just reframed it for it. That's all.
Reframing, just like you do for your athletes, Adam.
That's right.
So one of the other concepts that I thought this totally relates to trail and ultra culture is when you're going through a situation on your own, sometimes it's hard to be objective and to pull away and look at a situation because there is emotion involved when you're going through it. And one of the strategies is to remove yourself from that and look at it objectively. And the way that this relates to trail running is the support crew that we have when we're running, whether that's pacers, crew, aid station members. when you come into an aid station and look just hammered and thrashed, they can look at where you are objectively. You may be ready to throw in the towel, cut the band, pull the bib off and say, I'm done, DNF. But your crew can look at you objectively and say, you're not dead. You're not bleeding. Your health is not at risk. You can keep going. And sometimes that's what you need. If you can't do it for yourself, remove yourself and look objectively. It's great to have that community around us that can look objectively and say, you're not done yet. Like Kevin Sawchuk at Michigan Bluff that you tell the story of, Don. Give me 7 excuses why. Give me an excuse why you can't go on. Right?
Yeah, well,
Is that what he said?
Well, I had a 2.5 miles to think of my excuses coming up, and I still didn't come up with one that he liked, and that makes me that have I stuttered enough? Am I in an ice bath right now? So.
Are you shivering, Don?
I feel like it. And that's when I started saying, when you're the only person that thinks you should be dropping out when you go into an aid station, then you're probably not needing to drop out. When you're the only one, when you walk in with a million excuses and feeling so low, but you're the only one that knows that, well, it's probably all in your head. And your perception is, I'm done. And everybody else's perception is, let's get this guy out of here.
Yeah, I wrote this down because this was another thing that I really loved, but piggybacking perfectly off of what you just said, another quote from the book is, the perceiving eye is weak, the observing eye is strong. The observing eye sees simply what is there. The perceiving eye sees more than what is there. So we have the tendency, the perceiving eye is when we throw the emotion behind it, and it sees more than what's there. The objective or observing eye is when we're giving someone else advice and we can think, objectively. Looking at them, it's just harder to apply it to ourselves when we're in the situation. So engaging that observing eye is sometimes easier said than done, but very, very powerful.
Yeah, but if we could figure out how to use our observing eye on ourselves in the middle of a crisis, the other eye is very skilled, and the body is very good at coming up with excuses, and our body is so interested in making sure we don't die. Like, this is not feeling good. Your legs are cramping, stomach's gone, you're shivering and it's hot out. I mean, death is near. Stop what you're doing, find shade, sit down, and wait for better times to come. Our body has the ability to try to protect itself so well that we listen to it. It's a very strong and loud voice. It negotiates very well. And we need to be able to pull back from that and say, wait a minute, a lot of these things I might be hallucinating. It's not that bad. I need to do these 3 things to get myself through this. Or I just need to sit on the rock and wait for somebody to come along and take my band to give to the aid station captain.
Well, and Don, I've heard you say this a number of times on the trail as we're running and on the podcast. Your ability, again, I want to use your term, Adam, framing the situation. As you're going down the trail and you're having situations or struggles, pretend like you're elevating out of your body and you're playing a video game, and you need to decide, how do I get this avatar, who is me, to the next aid station? And by doing that, you're kind of reframing in your mind and being more objective instead of emotional, and say, okay, I'm playing the game. I'm not that person that's has the blisters and the stomach that's gone south and the leg cramps, but I see that my avatar is doing that. How do I get this person to the next aid station? And I've heard you say that a number of times, Don.
Yeah, so I think if we took all the runners at the start line, everybody with a bib has somebody on a couch with all of the comforts of home, and they were making those decisions along the way for this runner, we would probably have a finisher rate very high. It's like,
That's right.
I'm going to back the pace off because my avatar cannot sustain this. No, we're not.
You can see the fuel level, right?
Yeah. I see I have 1.5 hearts left.
Exactly.
And I need more than that to finish. I'm going to let this person pass me. I'm not emotionally attached to keeping up with this slow person. So let that guy go.
There's one other story that I can remember that I felt was very impactful that Ryan Holiday brings up in the book, and that is a story of George Clooney, right? We all know that he's this very successful actor. He started out not being very successful, doing what most actors do and going on auditions. And he said it was just miserable. He wasn't very good at it. and he was continually getting no's, and he was going into these auditions trying to sell himself, and found this part. This is the part, and he'd go in and do his best, and he'd fail, and then go away and sulk for a while. And he said then he finally had a revelation about how to look at that situation in a different light. And that was twofold. One, the person that is sitting on the other side of the desk, the producer or the casting director or whatever, they have a problem. And that problem is they need to find an actor that can play the part. And so he went into those auditions thinking, I'm not doing this to find a part for myself. I'm doing this to solve a problem for that casting director. How can I solve this problem for that director or that producer? I'm going in, and just that mind shift of I have nothing to lose. And that's the second part, is he doesn't have the job going in. He's not going to have the job going out. So why stress yourself about getting the job? It's going to happen down the road, possibly. But going in with that frame of mind difference, he said he was able to be more confident and be more intentional on how he acted, because he was solving a problem for the people on the other side of the desk.
And that works in so many different spaces in life. Whether you're interviewing for a job or trying to find a date or, whatever it might be, you are their solution. They're not your solution. Back that, Ryan, whatever you have to do with an edit to make that make sense, I may have turned it around, but you're their solution.
He's still in the ice bath, guys. Maybe it's time to pull him out.
5 minutes was doable, but no one's done this long. Well, we've gone through a lot of stuff, and I really don't think we took all the notes that we took, and I think we could talk on this for a very long time. One of the things that came out that I had written down, well, let's be honest, I asked ChatGPT to give me a question for a podcast, and I'm a trail running podcast, and it's something I could bring up, so it sounded like I read the book, and it said number 2 it gave me was staying present. And this is ChatGPT, which I realized ChatGPT read the book, and ChatGPT is a trail runner. And listen to this comment, and then let's make some dialogue on it. But I'm pretty certain that ChatGPT understands this. Trail running requires intense focus on the present moment. If you are distracted by the past, a fall that you took, or future worries, the tough hill ahead, you're more likely to make mistakes. Perception teaches us to stay grounded in the now, keeping your mind on the current step, the current breath, and the terrain right in front of you.
Brilliant.
ChatGPT is a trail runner. There's no doubt about it. You can't come up with that unless you've done it. So staying present, I think that's very stoic. That's very, very now. You just got to be where you are, solve your problem where you're at, and work with the options that you have.
Hey, so I want to ask both of you a question. As you were reading this section on perception, what principle or topic did you think that I absolutely know what they're talking about there because I learned about it from trail running? And then the second part of the question is, what did you take out of the section on perception that you're going to use and implement into your trail and ultra? So it's a two-parter.
Okay.
What did you know beforehand that maybe you learned because of trail running? And number 2 is, what is something new that you're going to learn that you learned that you can put into your running?
God, do you think maybe you could have forwarded this in a text like 10 minutes before the show here? Let's turn it around. Since you have thought of this longer than we had, maybe it's only a millisecond. You had to think of it to ask it. What about you, Scott? What are a couple things, and then I'll give Adam and I time to conjure up a solution here.
So I will tell the first thing that I learned in my own running that applies to this perception is when I first ran Western States, the day that I started, and actually leading up to the day, I had this anticipation that a bus was going to hit me at some point during that day that I was running the race. I knew that it was going to hit me. And when a bus hits you, it's not pleasant. It hurts. You may want to stay down on the ground and cry a little bit and it may be limiting your day. I knew that that bus was going to hit me. And because of that, I had a perception of what was going to happen, and I prepared for that. And I went through scenarios in my mind and thought, how can I address that bus? How am I going to accept the bus? How am I going to? I didn't look at the bus as a negative, a bad thing. I looked at it as something. It's a situation that's going to happen, and I need to make it through that situation if I think I'm going to finish. And I think that's one of the lessons that I did learn prior to this book, but this book talks about that and actually probably frames it a little bit better than I just said.
I'm going to tag right onto that if I can, Scott, because what changed for me, I practiced that too. You probably taught it to me as you told me that story, and I started.
Or you taught me.
Or maybe Adam taught us both, and we were on the show, and he's like, "Come on, guys, I totally told you this stuff." And so I have rehearsed when this happens. When this happens, I'll do this. When this happens, I'll do this. If I get a cramp, I do this. So I've got all the simple rules in place. And so I thought that's a great thing to rehearse this so I'm not surprised, so that I see it. I've been there, done that. But one thing that I add now after reading this is I need to see that bus coming. I need to see myself on the ground. But importantly, I need to see myself running successfully well afterwards. I need to envision that. It's easy to predict a bus. It's easy for me to predict, being on the ground, but I need to see a complete recovery, that the next mile I'm just on a cloud and running great. So I started thinking, when I rehearse these scenarios, I need to also celebrate the success after it happens.
Yeah, my example of this, that was a great one, by the way, Don. And you too, Scott. My example of this, actually, interestingly, the two answers are kind of similar, but just with a little bit of a tweak. So the thing that I felt sort of reinforced, or something that I already believed that I noticed them delving into, or noticed Ryan delving into this book, was it's sort of the idea of controlling what you can control, like we talked about earlier, right? So like, you are recognizing your power and understanding that, for example, we create obstacles when we say, oh, we're screwed. This is over. I'm in huge trouble now. If you're in a race, you haven't been eating for a while, you get dehydrated, I just totally screwed that up. I'm done. There's a difference between saying that and saying, okay, this is what has happened. Now, what are my options moving forward? Because at some point in the book, he says, there's always a way out. No matter what the situation is, there's always an answer. It might not be the best answer, but there's always an answer, right? So that would be the thing that I think I sort of had reinforced from reading this. But then sort of a different take on that I hadn't thought about before and really hadn't delved into, and now I'm loving thinking about how this applies to everything in life, is sort of what we talked about earlier, and just being in a situation and recognizing how your emotion is impacting your perception of the situation. So that was the thing that I knew, but I never really thought about it on like a literal level, right? Where you're experiencing something and you're frustrated or upset or angry. Okay. It's okay that you're feeling that way, but you have to be able to separate that from how you're going to move forward through the obstacle that is in front of you, right? And I think in the past, maybe for myself personally, there's been situations where I've felt those things and then I've sort of moved forward with those feelings, trying to work through the obstacle. And now in hindsight, I'm recognizing that probably wasn't the most productive way to do it. And again, I think he said at some point, he says, and I think maybe Don referenced this earlier, that it's okay to be sad or to give yourself the time you need to recognize that this has been a failure. In fact, I'll give you a quick example. One thing that is always kind of like a gut punch for me in races, and I try not to do it, but it doesn't happen every time, but it does happen some of the time, is taking a wrong turn or getting lost on a course. Whenever that happens, it's tough for me personally. I just can't stop thinking, this extra however many miles, I didn't need to do that. Now, I've done that, and now it's going to add on this mileage. And so I've come up with a way to deal with this now. And that way is, as soon as I get to the next aid station, I tell my crew, I'm so annoyed that I did this extra mileage. I tell them it's sort of like a therapy session. I get it off my chest, and then we don't talk about it again. It's over. And so that's just one example of something that I've tried to. It's not being emotionless. It's having this emotion, acknowledging it, but then not letting it be a part of your decision making.
Very good.
Yeah. That's tribute that to Brian Contosh, or Tosh, one of the greatest golden nuggets that I've learned in the 13 years we've been doing this podcast is give the situation its time, define what that time is, and then get past it. And I think that's brilliant. I think the thing that I'm taking away from this section on perception that I can do better is the John D. Rockefeller example, the astronaut example, where I need to stay calm. I'm an emotional person, and when something happens, my knee jerk is the deer reaction to run into traffic. And usually I'm pretty good at curbing that, but I still have that original thought. I want to train myself that I can be calm in any situation. And to our point that worry doesn't give you more options to solution. Look at the situation as a situation, and how is that going to be my path forward? This obstacle, to the point of the book's title, that obstacle is actually the way. And it's a better way because you're going to learn more, you're going to experience more, you're going to be a better version of yourself once you get through that obstacle.
Scott, that was a brilliant show wrap, and I'm just going to ruin it, okay? Because I have this one comment that came up in my mind when Adam was talking earlier, and that is our physical state will manifest to match our emotional state. So if we start conjuring up problems in our head and panic and anxiety, we'll start finding things in our body to match, to justify, to validate what that emotional state is, because we don't want to be wrong. We want to say, you know what, that thought that I had in my head, I can see these problems because I want to be accurate with what I'm thinking right now. So I think they go hand in hand. There's two sides of that coin. One side's going to match the other. And if they're not already, they soon will.
I love that, Don. Just a quick add on to that. When I was on The Wheel, the Discovery Channel reality show, I remember it had never been more clear to me just how intertwined the physical, mental, and emotional was. There were some days where, I was basically starving. I was missing my family. I was not always in a good mental state. And then sometimes it would just be catching a fish and eating that fish, and then everything would change. All of a sudden, then I felt like emotionally I was good. I felt like I could move forward, and I felt like I had the gusto to keep going for weeks and weeks. And I just realized that, like, even when you have to maybe fake it sometimes, if you can get yourself to a point of saying, okay, this is what's going to happen moving forward, I think if you can do that mentally, your body is going to respond, your spirit is going to respond, and good things are going to happen.
Well, that's a good wrap right there, Scott.
I was going to say a great background example is as kids, as Adam's child is in the background, experiencing a situation and is emotionally reacting to that situation. Thank goodness we grow out of that. Or at least we hope we grow out of that, right?
Yeah, not everybody.
Some adults I know still react the same way as a child does, but I think that's great. Fascinating discussion. It's a fascinating book that can absolutely relate to trail running and make us better trail runners, but it's something that we can incorporate into our lives that makes us better humans as well. And it's a great book. The next two episodes, not the next two episodes, but there's two episodes in the series. They'll be spread out. The next one is action. Once you have this perception of the obstacle or the situation, you need to act. There needs to be some action. And then the final one will be the will to continue, or the will to persevere. If you haven't got the book, go get it. It's also in Audible form. If you're like me, I have both a hard copy and the audio version, because sometimes when I'm listening to the audio version, my mind wanders and I don't catch it all. But when I'm reading, I do. And so I kind of vacillate between the written and the verbal language, but it's available in both. It's very inexpensive. We'll link both of those to the show notes.
Adam, thank you so much for joining us and making this just a great topic to discuss and throw around. And I hope that others that are out there will tag on and do the same thing on their next trail runs and talking about some of these concepts in their miles and bringing out the truth of what's happening in our sport.
And you've already found out Adam is a thinker. He's a great philosopher, and that's why we have him on these episodes. Adam is also the co-winner of The Wheel. There were 2 winners.
Correct,
Which was a show that was on Discovery that only went 1 season because it was so expensive to produce. He also won on The Price is Right, which is a game show here in the United States. He won the Showcase Showdown. I think you won a car. Is that?
It was not a car, kitchen appliances, a big screen TV, and a trip to Japan.
That's right, a trip to Japan.
Yeah, which was awesome, by the way.
In addition to just continuing to win, by the way, I wonder if you're still buying lottery tickets, but not only does he have the ability to win, set some fastest known records, he's a great runner, professional runner, and he's also a coach. Where can we find out more about your coaching efforts, Adam?
Yeah, probably the easiest place would just be adamkimble.com. And you could also reach out to me on Instagram, adamkimble8.
What's the 818 stand for?
That's just a number that it's not like a birthday or anything. It's just it has a significant meaning to me.
You don't need to tell if it's personal.
Yeah. It's a family thing. It's a family thing with someone that passed away a long time ago.
There was 817 Adam Campbell's already out there. So
I was thinking it's the 14th of August that we're recording this. I'm thinking maybe I need to get him a birthday present in 4 days. But I'm glad I don't have to do that.
If you want to, you'd be a couple months early, but if you want to, you can. Just kidding.
Adam, thank you so much. Put on your Stoic hat. Learn a little bit about Marcus Aurelius and some of those ancient philosophers. One of the things that I'm surprised of, this Stoicism or Stoic philosophy was created or developed millennia ago, but it's almost as if it was written last month. It's that pertinent to our times today. Go get the book and participate in our next 2 episodes. And in the meantime, lace up your shoes and run.
Mas. Nice. Thanks, Adam.